Now, vulnerable people are playing Russian roulette when they need care in England. Campaigners are warning, with a quarter of services failing on safety. The Care Quality Commission found drug errors, lack of staff and falls were the biggest problems, branding the standards completely unacceptable. Well, let's speak now to somebody who's had personal experience of this issue. Jane Connery's mum has dementia, and she joins me now from Gerrard's Cross. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Very sorry to hear of your experience with your mother. Just tell us how you became aware that you thought your mother was being mistreated.
Well, my mother was mistreated. She was failed in her first care home, had preventable neglect against her several times in her second care home, and was treated with completely no respect or dignity in her third care home, so much so that she's now home living with me and very happy. OK, well, I want to bring in our other guest, Stephen McCarthy. He is Director of Action on Elder Abuse and joining us from Central London. And I just want to talk to you now because we're hearing firsthand, aren't we, of exactly that Russian roulette when it comes to care, that somebody who you believe that you love is being treated well, is getting dreadful service when they should be, you know, most protected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the figures that we've seen today from CQC are genuinely shocking. We're talking about 24% of people in care, or 24% of care homes and 37% of nursing homes failing in their obligations to keep their residents safe. And if we're in any doubt that there's a crisis in social care, this is the sort of thing that should put people right on that.
Jane, when you raised the alarm, what was the response, and do you feel as though it was adequate?
I think, I started my CCTV in care homes campaign pretty much straight after my mum went in her first care home. What I saw was a lot of preventable neglect being brushed under the carpet. Families were not given a voice. Families were pretty much second-class citizens, and I know that I was labelled probably troublesome. I had my mother's care at the forefront of my agenda, and certainly number one, as my family did. Unfortunately, it wasn't about the carers, even though my mother was slapped by a night carer. I can honestly say that was a unique situation. The carers are failed as much as the residents are. They're not allowed to carry out their duty of care due to profit over care in many care homes. And it makes me laugh, you know. This is supposed to be news today. It's no news to the families who actually go through this every day. And as my campaign shows, we have some very, very unhappy families out there that are trying to get justice right now for the preventable neglect and abuse their loved ones are facing. And it's nothing to do with the CQC. The CQC are doing what they can, and I work well with the CQC. And they can only do as much as the government. I blame the government here. You know, they can't afford to do what they've done, and that is bury their heads. CCTV now has to be in our care homes. We've got vulnerable people, and we have to start protecting them. Where is the dignity in people sitting in a soil pad for 5 hours? Where is the dignity of these relatives, including my mother, sat in a chair looking at a wall? You know, this isn't about carers. They're overworked, underpaid, and I've noticed that when I was in the care system, carers doing their very best. This is about managers and care service providers who are getting paid quite a lot of money and not administering the care that they should be.
And Jane, what about this point of cameras? I wonder, when it comes to dignity, if there is a sort of fine line here, when obviously you want to make sure that nobody's left to fester and not treated properly. But is there also a question of dignity when people are being looked after, being washed in delicate areas, and it's all on camera? Should we not just be able to trust the people that are caring for them and make sure that they're giving the adequate training to make sure that that happens, rather than having to rely on these cameras?
Oh, gosh, Isabel, I mean, in an ideal world, come on, yes, of course, we're not in an ideal world. This isn't about trust. This is about bringing transparency into the dementia care homes. These people do not have a voice, and we need to protect them. My mother could not tell me that she was being failed. I was there. I picked up on it. And a lot of families that do visit their loved ones, they pick up on it, and they're not being listened to. with today's modern technology, and the CQC, in a meeting that I had, have actually agreed with this. The modern technology available today, it's not about dignity. You know, there's so much modern technology out there. I have to add that my campaign, which is receiving tens of thousands of members, and we've actually gone to 10 Downing Street with the petition, 62% of families or the public now want to see CCTV in care homes, and my campaign is about communal areas only. So we want to make it mandatory so that the care service providers who are basically flouting the rules and the regulations constantly, because there are good homes out there are brilliant care homes out there, and some do have CCTV, so if it can work in some, it can work in all. We have to now get this made mandatory. There's enough talking going on. We're seeing headlines time after time, Panorama. When is it going to stop? Yeah. When are families going to be listened to, and carers?
Let me bring Stephen in on some of those points that you raised there, because Jane's saying this isn't news, that you talk to any of the families and they will tell you this problem has been around for a long time. Is it getting worse?
I don't think there's much doubt. I think CQC have probably acknowledged that things are getting worse in some circumstances now. Going back to something that Jane said just now about being considered to be trouble by raising these issues, we hear this all the time. It's hugely problematic. People like Jane luckily do dig in and keep fighting for the right things to happen. But there is an issue around funding as well. There are great care homes, great care services in this country, but we're talking about huge numbers that are now failing. There's a shortage of funding. You can't get away from that fact.
But there has been more money pledged by the government in the last budget. Will that go far enough to resolving some of these issues? Because we heard Jane very much squarely putting the blame on the shoulders of the government. But is that fair?
It is from the funding perspective. Yes, there's been additional funding announced. It looks a bit like a sticking plaster. I think the King's Fund have looked into that and have realised that by 2019 there'll still be another £2 billion lacking just to keep services going to the standard that they are at the moment. So of course it needs investment, but at the same time there are those other issues that Jane's talked about. There is issues with management. You've got understaffing going on. There's brilliant carers out there doing all the best they can, but they can't do everything. We need to fund these services properly, so in turn they're staffed properly, and these older people can carry on with their lives with some kind of dignity, and that's something that's beyond a lot of older people at the moment, and that's entirely unacceptable. And
may I just finish with you, Jane, and just asking, when you did raise the alarm and reveal the CCTV footage that you had, was legal action taken against those that had neglected your mother, and do you think that the law is strong enough on this issue?
Absolutely not. I mean, it was interesting what that gentleman said. You know, my mum was evicted from her care home twice in 2 separate care homes. An 80-year-old, partially sighted, 5'5", very, very vulnerable lady. And that was because I raised issues and other family members raised issues. You know, what we've got to do is we've got to now say that whilst we sort out this complete travesty of a care system, and whatever we have to do, we've got to do. But whilst we're doing it, can we please safeguard these residents that can't talk, that can't say what's going on? And I think people have to wake up and smell the coffee. It could happen to you. And I, for one, am terrified. So, you know, it's not about scaremongering. It's about educating people and saying, we really have to wake up. My mother was evicted from a care home, a dementia care home, because failings that were proven were raised. Is that fair? I don't think so. And the government allows it.
Well, Jane Connery, I have to thank you so much for speaking so passionately about your own personal experience, and Stephen McCarthy for your input and expertise as well. Thank you both very much indeed.